Hi guys, it's Teresa. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to talk about my favorite books of the whole entire 2010s decade. I know a lot of people have been doing this kind of video recently, and I think it's really fun and really cool, and everybody has kind of like their own take to it, so that makes it all the more special. And I kind of struggled with how to approach this video because honestly my reading tastes have changed so much over the past 10 years that there's basically no books that I read like 10 years ago that I would absolutely still love and 100% recommend right now. And I also didn't want this video to just be me recommending you books that I read over the last 3 years, because that's not really the point of it, right? So I basically decided to try and somehow find records of all the books I read over the last 10 years. A lot of it is lost to the universe, unfortunately, because I didn't start Goodreads until I think 2014. And even then, I added books that I had read previously, fortunately, but I have no idea when I actually read them because I didn't add a read date. So I did give them ratings and I still have some memories of them, but I don't exactly know when I read them. So especially the first few years of the 2010s are really much more a guess than an actuality. But basically, I wanted to see what was my favorite book of any given year of the 2010s. And I wanted to try and specifically pick books that I would still, to some extent at least, stand behind as actually being good. So it's not necessarily my favorite book of that year as I was thinking of that year, if that makes sense. More so retrospectively, I read this book in 2010 and I still think it's a good book. Is there logic in there somewhere? I'm not entirely sure, but we're just gonna go with it. Okay, so we're starting with 2010, and this is a book that I'm actually pretty sure if I read it now, having already read so many thrillers, I probably wouldn't love as much. But this was my first thriller as far as I can recall, and a book that shocked me and rocked me to my core, and that is Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson. It had one of the most amazing plot twists to me in all eternity up until that point. I've told this story multiple times before, but basically while I was reading this book, I was really sick and I had a high fever, and I had actual fever dreams of the stuff that I read about in this book. That makes it sound so much more crazy and out there than it actually was, but to me it just consumed me so much because it was such a psychologically harrowing thriller, and I just loved it at the time. This book follows a woman who loses her memory every single night, and she lives with her husband and he has to leave her all these notes and stuff to help her remember. And honestly, as I said, looking back, this probably isn't the best thriller out there, not the most shocking thing, but to me it was. And looking back, this definitely was a highlight for me of the years around the year 2010, at least, because that's as close as I can get with my estimations here. For 2011, I picked Divergent by Veronica Roth. I know this book has kind of gone through its ups and downs. People like it and then they didn't like it. I'm not sure. This didn't live through exactly what a lot of other YA series have lived through, where I feel for example, things like Hush Hush or Fallen or Twilight even, all these romances that were so hyped at some point and then people just threw them to the wolves essentially. But Divergent has kind of stuck around, and I was actually one of the few people that actually enjoyed Allegiant as well. I loved the ending. I liked how it ended. I'm sorry, don't shoot me. I was a fan. But honestly, I did really like Divergent. I don't actually know when I read The Hunger Games. Just now that I'm thinking about it, it might also have been The Hunger Games that I read that year and really loved. I can't say, I don't know, I don't have memories, but we'll just put both of these books as some of my favorite books of 2011, because at the time I was absolutely in love with them. And I still think to this day that for what they were pretty good. Another thing that needs to be said for the years 2010, 2011, I actually spent the school year 2010-2011 in Ireland as an exchange student. I actually do remember reading quite a lot of books that year, and I used to, in my daily planner kind of thing, weekly planner, I'd used to write when I would start a book and when I would finish it. Unfortunately, I don't know where that planner is, or I could use it for this video, but don't know where it is. I have it somewhere, I'm sure, but it's probably at my parents' house, so we just have to go off of my guesswork here for the most part. But I do remember that being a pretty good time for my reading, because I wasn't really doing much else besides school. Then the year 2012 was when I graduated from high school, and my favorite book that year, I'm gonna say, was 1984. This is actually a book where I'm sure that I read it that year because I had to write a kind of small thesis on it for my English class. I chose it as a topic for my thesis. Actually, I chose George Orwell, so I did a lot of his works in general, but specifically 1984, and I really enjoyed it. I loved the book. I thought it was a mind fuck like no other. I really had a fun time. Fun time. 2012, 2013 is another year that I read quite a bit because after graduation I did like a gap year working as an au pair in England, and we had a pretty good library where I was living, and I had to take the kids, I took the kids to the library a lot, and then I grabbed a lot of books there as well. And I do remember reading quite a bit throughout that year. And I also bought some books because I found Waterstones and they're like 2 for half price or something, or 2 for 1. Like, I don't even know. They have like a lot of good deals sometimes. And I bought so many books, almost too many, for like on my meager salary as an au pair. But I have 2 favorite books for that year. And the only reason why is because I also have 2 worst books of that year for my other video that I'm doing about the worst books of the decade. So I thought it was only fair that I had 2, okay, because I couldn't decide. The first is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, and another wonderful thriller, like, again, really, really important in my discovery of like how much I enjoy thrillers, how much I love reading them. At the time, this was, you know, so new and so different and genuinely an amazing piece of work. If it were published now, it probably wouldn't have the impact neither on me nor on the general public as it did, but I think at the time it was really important and it did a lot, like kind of push some boundaries in a sense, and kind of creativity as well in thriller writing. At least that's how I perceived it, and I just loved it. I loved everything about this book. Again, such a mindfuck, wonderful. And then I also read and really enjoyed The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This was one of my first, I believe, forays into adult fantasy. I'm not entirely sure when that started. I've always been a fantasy reader, but I really, really, really love this book. I think I saw, who was it? Whitney Milam, who used to be like a vlogger, kind of at the time of like Luke Connor and Ingrid and like all these people were like just coming up, like these daily vlogging was becoming a thing, and I was obsessed with it, and I found like all these people, and she would do videos about the books that she was reading, and I think she was reading Lies of Locke Lamora, and I bought like everything she recommended, and I fell in love with this book, and I'm still in love with this book, and I still recommend it all the time. It's such a good heist story. It's so intricate, so political, and I can't imagine like coming up with such stories that are so twisty and turny and just so clever. One of the best cast of characters of any book. I just adored it. And if you for some reason haven't listened to me tell you to read this book before, please listen to me now, because it's amazing. You won't regret it. 2014, I was in Vienna in my first and second semester of university studying Japanese studies, and my favorite book from that year, I think, was Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. This is a YA series, and it's really interesting. It follows a world where basically the roles of black and white people in society are reversed. So essentially, black people have a history of like enslaving and mistreating and discriminating against white people, and it's basically about a forbidden romance between a black girl and a white boy, and it's so wonderfully written, and I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was so thought-provoking. I was like, I don't know, how old was I? I was like 21, but I still very much had like a teenage mindset, and this really spoke to me, and I just really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was so interesting. I did read the second book, Knife's Edge, as well, and enjoyed it, but when I tried continue with the series later on, I found that I couldn't connect to it as much anymore, because I do think it's more targeted towards a younger audience of YA, and since I've grown out of that a little bit more over the last few years, I don't really gel with it as much anymore. But that's definitely on me and not on these books, and I still highly, highly recommend you to read them if you haven't already and you typically do enjoy younger YA voices as well. In the year 2015, I finally took the plunge and I read The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, the first book in the Mistborn series. I also immediately read the second. I think I read them literally within in 1 week, both of these books, and I absolutely love them. But that did put me in a bit of a slump, and I ended up reading the third one like a year later because it was just so much at once. I absolutely love these books, and I was absolutely blown away by how well written they were. Again, such great world building, great characters. I was obsessed with the magic system, and this just immediately became one of my favorite series that I would still to this day recommend to everyone to read. Like, I'm sure most people have already read it anyway because it's so good and so popular, but rightfully so, because it's genuinely phenomenal. 2015, 2016 is also the year where I spent 2 semesters in Japan. I didn't honestly read much during that time. Most of my videos from that time are like vlogs about Japan and like the things I was doing and like ideas I was having and like discussing. There's a lot of things. I actually have like 2 videos as well of me like doing like Japanese presentations on camera for you guys that you seem to really enjoy. I am too scared to go back and watch them now because I'm sure my Japanese is a hell of a lot better. But anyway, I didn't read a lot during the time because, as you know, I love physical books. Love reading physical books, and that wasn't really an option while I was there because I would have to like carry them all back. So I had like only a small selection of books that I actually had while I was there. But when I got back that fall in 2016, I read Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer, which is the book that single-handedly turned me into a vegetarian. I absolutely love this book. It was so moving to me, and even though like it's about the US farming industry, that doesn't directly, impact me because I don't live in the US and the rules and regulations in Europe and in Austria are a lot stricter than in the US. I still felt like by eating animals, we were causing needless suffering, and it really just immediately turned me off of meat, and I haven't looked back. I have started eating fish again this year because I find that, especially when eating out, eating vegetarian isn't that healthy because they give you a lot of deep fried things and a lot of cheesy things, and it's really not a fun experience anymore. And I thought, you know what, like just a nice fillet of fish is gonna be so much better for my body. And I think it is. So this is one of the most impactful books I've ever read that definitely changed my life, and I highly recommend checking it out. Whether you're like thinking about going vegetarian or not, I think it's just really eye-opening. It's important to know that these things are happening. Then we get to the year 2017, the first year I actually did a favorites video for the year. So I have like a concrete, definitive pick that I like even at the time thought it was amazing. I still think it's amazing. It's Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. This book is set in Nigeria and follows a woman who is barren, so she can't conceive. And her parents-in-law basically convince her husband to take another wife because that's very common in their culture. And it's just about her story, her struggling, her suffering, and it's just wonderful. I absolutely loved it. It's so well written and just extremely moving and beautiful. And if you haven't read it yet, please do, because you won't regret it. Also in the year 2017, I graduated from my bachelor's degree, yay! And then immediately started another bachelor's degree in Chinese studies because I couldn't immediately switch to a master's for some reason. So I did 2 semesters of that. What a waste of time. But I did it, okay? I know a little bit of Chinese now, good. 2018, my favorite book was The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I absolutely adored this book. This was a really weird experience for me because I think I heard Little Book Owl talk about the book way before it came out, and I just heard the title and the synopsis, and I could feel it in my bones. I was so hyped for it. I'd never been this hyped for a book without even knowing that much about it. I hadn't heard any reviews yet because no one had read it. I just knew it was gonna come out and it was gonna be a thing. And then I got my hands on it. It was everything I wanted and more. And this book and me just have a perfect love story, and I just adored it. I also did an individual book review for this, and Stuart Turton himself commented, and it was the best moment of my booktube career so far. Yay. Love that for me. In 2018, I was finally able to start my master's program in translation studies, which I'm still doing today. I'm really enjoying it. It was the best decision for me because this is really what I think I want to do for the rest of my life. Something to do with translation and with languages. It's just my calling. It's how it is. In 2018, I also moved in with my boyfriend, which was fun and still is fun. And now I live here in this wonderful flat and not in my old one, which if you have seen that one, it wasn't a great time. It was really cold all the time, basically. And that brings us to 2019. My favorite book of 2019 was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This is another psychological thriller that completely blew me away. It's so short but packs a punch. It's just phenomenal. It's super, 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 again, mindfuckery. And if you haven't noticed, those are my favorite books that like really just play with your mind. It's phenomenal. Can't recommend it enough. Nothing all that special happened in 2019. I don't have that big of a plan for 2020 either. I'm basically just focusing on finishing my master's, doing internships when I can, getting some money together so that hopefully next year I can go back to Japan. That's the grand plan for now. But yeah, those are my 10 favorite books of the decade. Actually, there's 11 because I mentioned 2. So we've got my 11 favorite books of the decade. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your favorite books of the 2010s in the comments and what you thought of the ones I mentioned today. I hope to see you back very soon. In the meantime, check out these videos. Why don't you? Have a lovely week. Bye!